I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Yay, so we were going to talk about Jill Stein being on the Breakfast Club and how that was a disaster. I didn't get to watch it, but I know that you watched a little bit of it. So some of the things that are coming up, because I know that you've been paying a little bit more attention to Jill Stein as an option coming up with this election as one of our presidential candidates who comes from the Independent Party.
Green Party.
Green Party. All right. As we were talking about climate change in another episode that I hope you watch, but from the Green Party that does definitely have a platform and policies that we don't typically get to hear about. So, what happened to candidate Stein on the
Well, I think
Breakfast
it's
Club
curious
with
that you
Angela
called
I?
it a disaster. That's not a word I would have used for it, but
Oh, okay. Because I heard it was a disaster.
no, I don't think it was.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
I
Oh,
mean,
now I need to feel like need to watch it.
yeah, I mean, so Jill Stein and Butch Ware, who was her running mate, they went on the Breakfast Club, which is a pop culture talk show on YouTube, and and it was interesting. I mean, the hosts are. I think it's important to say for those of you who haven't seen the Breakfast Club that they're dynamically speaking, the hosts are three African American folks, and Jill is a white Jewish woman, and Butch Ware is a black Muslim man, and so that is that had an interesting dynamic just from the rip in terms of me watching it, and and I think there were some moments. There were a couple of interesting moments. One of them was that Butch Ware, Professor Butch Ware, who was the running mate, mispronounced Kamala's name a couple of times in the beginning, or I don't know if it was in the beginning, somewhere during when he would give his remarks, and he got corrected
Hmm?
by Angela, who was one of the hosts of the show.
Hmm.
And what I appreciated, because I wouldn't have expected someone with his background to mispronounce her name, which maybe is racist of me to think, but that I just wouldn't have expected it. So I thought it was interesting when he did that a couple of times. And
Mm.
Angela called him out, and he I appreciated what he said. He said, "You're right." He said, I am mispronouncing it because I heard it mispronounced when in the beginning. I think that's what he said, and it imprinted. And he said, "But you're right. It is important for me to say it correctly, and I will make that change. And I'm glad you pointed it out." It was kind of refreshing to see someone get called out for something that they were doing and actually like take it with grace and say, "You're right, and I'm sorry, and I will do it better." And I don't think he mispronounced it again throughout the show. So he adapted and moved, which I appreciate. I think there was a time where Angela, I mean, I think it was pretty obvious to me, and I've heard other people in their breakdown of the show talk about Angela's kind of viewpoint and her mindset and where she might be coming from, what her perspective is, and that she's very hard in the Democratic Party boat. And so I felt some tension with that, that she didn't really get Jill at all, and wanted to have some gotcha moments with her was the vibe I got. She did ask Jill about the question that she asked, and I think maybe the to your point about it was being a disaster, the clip that was circulating a lot was when Angela asked Jill how many members of Congress there were, and I went back and
That
watched
they
it.
she needed to win, right?
Yeah, that
Hmm.
she needed to win, but the way she asked the question at first was actually Jill didn't. I don't think Jill really knew how to answer it because the question was confusing. It was like, are you asking how many members are in Congress? I watched it and I didn't
Yeah.
I was I when I went back and watched the show, like saw that moment in the context of the actual show, it the questioning did feel, I understood a little bit the stumble. And I'm not even sure. I think what Angela was asking was how many Democratic members, or how many members of Congress, period, but likely they would come from the Democratic side, would support Jill in anything that she did were she to become president. I think that's the question that Angela was going for. But I didn't think that the phrasing dictated that. It felt like it needed some nuance, it needed some unpacking a little bit to totally understand what she was asking. And I'm not entirely sure that Jill can answer that question. I'd be curious to get
Mm,
your thoughts on that, are, because it's like, first of all, the elections are happening across the board. Everybody in the House is up for reelect. So for her to be able to say how many she needs to support her in different things, I'm not sure that question is answerable, quite honestly.
mm,
Curious about your thoughts.
mm. Yeah, so too, because I didn't watch it, I don't know the context of the question. What I can say about Angela Rye, very much like Amanda Seales, is that these are very intellectually sound, very studied, very politically astute human beings. So I would be curious, and you saw my facial reaction on questioning Angela's question, and a lot of what I understood people responding to, because that's what I heard. I heard like the chatter about it, and the
Right.
chatter was like Angela came in the way that she comes, and Jill wasn't ready for the
Mm,
way that Angela comes. And her not being ready like that really calls into question her continuing to run for presidency and not being able to like get over or move further along in the process.
yeah.
So those are some of the things that come to mind in
Mm,
particular. And like just to go back for folks that are listening for the Breakfast Club, it's on YouTube, but it's a radio talk show. And Charlemagne the God and the other folks that are on, Angela came on as a guest because of her political astuteness to be able to be the person that actually has this conversation because she's like one of the most educated and well versed in politics, specifically as it relates to issues within urban, African American, and kind of oppressed, marginalized communities. So the conversation, I imagine, was always, it was not so much of a gotcha, but as a I need to hear you respond to all of the issues that are critical to our community in a real way if you want us to like come in support of you. Like we really need to understand if you are a viable solution and an option to the the excuse me, Republicans and the Democrats,
uh-huh.
then we need to hear from you in a very real way. And can you speak to and answer the questions that we have that are coming out of our community that are critical? Um, and having to be prepped for that. Like so nobody who goes on the Breakfast Club, even if you are part of hip hop, urban culture, entertainment, no one who goes onto the Breakfast Club would go onto the Breakfast Club believing that you would not have to be accountable to community,
Sure.
um, Black community in particular, and be able to know that you know your stuff. You know, you were going into the rounds with the Joneses, so.
Hmm.
Um, I would be curious to know what Jill Stein's preparation was. If she knew that she was going into kind of a lion's den, if she thought that she needed to prepare in the way that she needed to prepare, and also her running mate, who I don't know anything about, but you know, both of them having the context of, hey, you're going into the Breakfast Club. So that one, you're going to be speaking to a particular demographic of folks who, you know, listen to and ride and are influenced by the conversations that happen on that morning show.
Uh-huh.
And be ready. You gotta be ready. There's certain things you gotta be ready for, and that's one of them.
Well,
um, and so
curious.
so the critique was that she wasn't ready. And the critique is always within within politics that folks are not ready to really tackle and address the issues that come out of the urban Black community. Just like that's not one of like the political priorities that exist. Yeah. So
Well,
I would push back on the gotcha moments because is it a gotcha moment or is it a hey, we are asking you legitimate questions because somebody needs to be accountable to wanting to answer them or to consider them or to be thinking about them on their political platform.
of course, yeah. I guess the gotcha moment that I was speaking to was that clip around Angela asking about how many members of Congress. I don't know. I don't know that that really is related to what you were just describing in terms of she wasn't asking about a specific issue that the Black community might be uplifting, and so or may want to be uplifted by the candidates. And so I am curious about that, and as it relates to what you just said. Of course, if Jill Stein wasn't ready to answer questions based on her policies and her or the things that she wants to get done, if she was, elected into office, then absolutely that's problematic. The gotcha thing came around because that was the clip that went, everywhere afterwards.
Um,
And I didn't think Angela was asking her a specific question about policy with regard to how it will impact the Black community. She was asking her about how many members were in Congress. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on that. I really appreciate, I just want to say out loud, I really appreciate your expansion on what the Breakfast Club is. I did not know it was a radio show, so there you go. Because I am not a person that consumes that content on the regular, and I've heard conversations about Charlemagne the God, and he's spent a lot of time in South Carolina, and I've heard about him through the lens of Black members of the community in South Carolina, and even though I don't have any personal stake in that, not a huge fan. So I've never watched the show, from start to finish with anyone. So
mhm.
disclaimer on that. So I really appreciate you expanding on Angela as well and her background. I did not mean to suggest that she didn't have a skill set to be there or anything like that. I just didn't have those deets. So I
But
appreciate
else,
you
yeah,
expanding on that.
yeah.
No, yeah,
But
she's
I can answer the question about so one thing that we just need to name again is we're both speaking about this kind of thing that went viral and not having the actual language of the question. So I don't have the language of the question. I kind of remember it being how many people do you need to win? And you don't know the answer to that. And the way that I understand and heard that question is everyone is challenging Kamala Harris for her ability to actually be in the office. And so that question, rather than I wouldn't see it as a gotcha, but that question is a legitimate, how much do you know about being in this office? Because if we are going to be voting for you, are we voting for the person who has the most knowledge, history of experience to be the most effective in this office? Because that is one of the narrative things that are going around right now is calling into question who is actually capable of being in this office. And that sounds like a question to identify how deeply engaged and how much do you know of the little intricacies of the things for you to get into that office. That's
yeah.
how I heard it. Um,
And I don't mean to I think it is challenging because we don't know the exact phrasing of the question. So, shame on us for not checking
we're
that
just
out
talking about stuff.
out of
Yeah.
this conversation. I know we're just talking. But what I understood the question to be, and I think we
Yeah.
talked about this before we came on the recording,
Yeah.
was how many people, how many members of Congress do you need to help you get your policies through, and sign them into law? And I don't know that she can even answer that question because all of the members of the House are up for reelection, and I don't even know how many members of the Senate are up for reelect. But it's like we don't know what the outcome, what the makeup of Congress is going to be if she got into office. So I don't know that that question is answerable. That's the
Hmm.
form of the question that I remember from what I
Hmm.
watched. But again, I think it would make it definitely would make sense for us to go back and actually listen to the entire phrasing of the question so that we know exactly what was being asked and whether or not she could conceivably answer the question in the way that would have been helpful for potential voters to, know her better and know what her capability is. I do
Well,
think she,
that's what I'm doing. I'm looking it up as you
are
speak, so
you
I'm gonna try to
okay?
find
Good.
it. Yeah.
Real time fact checking ourselves. That's good. That's good.
Okay, so here I'm seeing on salon.com. I'm trying to find somebody credible, right? This is important for us to do. Thank you
Right.
for bearing with us, people. So I'm just trying to make sure that okay, so I'm on Salon because Salon just gives me like the first thing, but we should probably follow up with this. The question was, how many total are there? Was what is it? 600 some number Stein says before Rye set the record straight. So hold on, that's not giving us the full question.
Yeah, it
Um,
would be important to hear like what led up to it, and then because I feel like it was a whole contextual moment, but I don't
mhm.
I don't have the transcript in front of me, so
Yeah. Okay. So in this article, it says that Rye attempted to demonstrate the Green Party's failure to build power from a grassroots level. She asked Stein how many members of the House of Representatives there were. How many total are there? What is it? 600 some number Stein said, beside before Rye set the record straight. So is that the question that you were?
that's yeah, that's the phrasing. And again, it was in the moment it was confusing as to like what was the actual question, what was she asking. There are 435 members of the House, and then there are 100 of the Senate. So I think the narrative about how the Green Party hasn't built power at the state and local level is is a narrative that I hear a lot, and it's not true. I googled it the other day to see how many Green Party candidates actually are in office, and I don't have the number in front of me to give you the detail, but there are people at the state and local level in the Green Party. A lot of it, what Jill Stein has talked about in a lot of ways, is how the Democratic Party consciously blocks so many people that are running on other platforms, not just Green Party, but independent, other parties. They block it so that that person can't either get on the ballot or can't, they fulfill the requirements that they're supposed to, and they still end up in court, and there's all these blocks. So yeah, it's just like anything else that we have to look at the greater structure of the two-party system and decide whether or not, the forces that these two parties own work very, very hard to keep the two-party thing in place because it promotes the chaos that they create every time we head into an election cycle. And I guess I just have changed my mindset about how impossible a climb that is, and to hold any third party accountable for not being able to break through when the two-party system has worked its ass off to stop them from breaking through. I just don't know how helpful that is to to make somebody to make the argument that somebody is totally unelectable. I've
Mhm.
just been learning a lot about that and kind of unpacking that for myself, because those narratives have been ensconced in my head for many many cycles, probably since I started voting. So
Yeah. I think it's important for us to clarify like what, and I don't know because I haven't spoken to Angela Rye
right,
directly,
right.
but what how you're defining and looking at what grassroots power building is, and not specific to Jill Stein, but for the Green Party. Even with the Democratic and the Republican Party existing, the Green Party has existed for decades now. And by grassroots power building in a grassroots kind of activist context, the Green Party has fallen short with what it can do as far as developing out consistent leaders over a long period of time.
Mhm.
And the in the context of having a conversation like that, the Democratic Party doesn't do a very strong job either of that. we see the Republicans doing that very strong with strategy, with outlines, with the with the playbook, all of the things, and us not being able to see that demonstrated the same way with the Democratic Party, and even less with the Green Party. But the Green Party has been around, has had resources, and can do a better job of building grassroots power, so that when it comes time for a new election, it's not just that we're having a conversation about a two-party system. And if you're even looking at during Occupy, and you had I want to call them libertarians, but there was a cool terminology that they were called. It just went out of my head right now. It's just I just can't think of it right now. It'll
Okay.
come back to me.
Okay.
But they were able to build really strong grassroots power in a very short period of time, regardless of having the Republican and Democratic Party. And see, and I'm even doing something very intentional and not calling it a two-party system, because when we even start to shift like our language in the way that we are contextualizing our politics, then that's another methodology of organizing and mobilizing around building grassroots power, right? Like even just shift, like it starts with shifting the language or making sure that we actually have shared language so that we know that we are going in the right direction. So, you know, I'm also like very aligned with somebody like Angela Rice. So it's it's hard for me to have this conversation because I know like the history of like the purposeness of the movement and the educational and political awareness that comes through the resource of knowledge that she gives in community. So it's like trying to under or trying being very clear about the purposefulness of the conversations and the questions that you would get from a Angela or Amanda or any of our political pundits that we have advocating for the needs in Black communities. Speaking of, we were also going to kind of mention what happened when both Kamala and Donald Trump went in front of the Black journalists.
Yeah,
And
well,
two
I don't know how
very
much time
different
we've got to cover that, but yeah.
conversations.
So Trump did it.
But
Trump did it probably a month or two ago. It's been a minute since he,
hmm
and it was horrible. It was a shit show
from the jump, from the
from the
very
jump,
like
the very jump.
opening. Yeah.
Yeah. He was as racist as he possibly could be, and calling everybody on the stage illegitimate and not real journalists, and they don't know what they're talking about, and all the things. It's a horrible question. It's a horrible. I can't believe you asked a question. It's never been asked such a horrible question in my life, and all the things he does.
Horrible people, these people,
Horrible,
those
horrible questions,
folks.
and yeah, yeah.
hmm
And apparently he kept saying that they were late starting, but it was
hmm
because of him.
hmm
His people are the one that kept him off the stage. So they were late because of him, but he was blaming
hmm
it all on the Black women that were on the
You
stage,
know,
which is not unusual.
colored people time. We know what he was doing. All of the tropes, all of the narratives, all of the
All
things
of them.
that
Yeah.
he can always pull out because that's what he's familiar with.
I
Okay.
guess. Yeah.
It's
So
tired.
Kamala was on last 2 weeks ago, I guess, and
hmm
I did watch the whole thing. What sparked my knowing that she was on was I saw a clip that a friend of mine, a Black woman on socials, shared, and it was actually a short clip of the very end of the interview. So it was when Kamala stood up and she said thank you and she shook hands and she just did this kind of offhanded bye and she darted off the stage with a
mm
vibe of being, I'm over you people, I'm off to the next thing.
hmm
And the the three journalists that were on the stage with her throughout the interview kind of turn and look at each other like, what the hell was that? I mean,
hmm
there was no audio really. It was just body language and facial expressions and all of that. So I saw that clip and then I thought that sparked me into going, oh, she looks,
Curiosity.
I need to watch that. So I watched the whole thing and, didn't learn anything new. Didn't she, it was, of course, it was just an opportunity for her to answer the questions, that we've heard before. So that's not, no judgment there. Just that's what it was. I didn't really, it's interesting because the clip that I watched at the end, the thing that first sparked my interest in watching the interview, seemed like there was some level of contention between
Mm,
interviewers and Harris. But when I watched and this speaks to editing and all of that. When I watched the actual full interview, I kept waiting to feel that contention show up, and maybe
mm,
some of the questions that they asked her, or maybe she's obfuscating and trying not to answer something and they keep pressing her, and things that can happen in an interview that would make folks to have some contention at the end of it. And I didn't see any of that. So I mean, they asked her questions. They asked her questions about Israel. She did the whole, it has the right to defend itself, and I could tell that they were pushing back and wanting her to not just fall into the tropes and actually speak to the issue. She kept saying they were working for a ceasefire, and they were like, yeah, but you're not really. And so there was a little bit of contention there, but yeah. So again, it speaks to editing and how these interviews can be maybe not necessarily accurate portrayals of how ready a person is to do
systemic.
whatever job looking at. I mean, that whole I've been learning a lot about that whole trope about electability and how bullshit
Mm,
it is, and
mm,
how people are electable if people resonate with their platform and their messaging and they will vote for them. They're electable. Everybody's electable. It's like that electability bullshit only comes up when it's a woman candidate or a woman of color candidate, or and so I try to, I don't know, I've kind of let that one go. I don't really buy into the electability crap anymore. And so any questions that kind of lend itself to, do you really think you're electable, bothers me.
mhm.
Because it doesn't feel authentic, or it feels like
Was that one of the questions?
it feeds into a trope. I mean, I'd love to check this out because it feels like that was a little bit of your explanation about where Angela was coming from, that it was all about whether or not she was ready for the office or whether or not she was electable. I mean, she's been running for her office for several cycles, so I think she probably knows
She's
the
the vice president of the United States right now.
no,
Like,
Harris. I'm talking about Jill. I'm sorry. Not the
oh, okay, okay.
I
I was
know.
like,
No,
and
clearly
people keep
Harris
on
knows
asking
what
this
the job
question about
is. Yeah.
Harris, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
No,
she's
I
the
was
vice
talking about Jill
president.
Stein.
If something happened to Joe, she would already be president, y'all. What are we talking
No,
about?
no, no. I was talking about Jill Stein. I
Yeah,
wasn't talking,
I
I
got you.
wasn't talking about Jill Harris. So,
Gotcha.
so yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know whether, I mean, I'm very aware of the tropes and the intention and the narrative and the orchestration. We talked about this with the debate, that
Yeah.
all of it is it's all orchestrated to push a specific message. And so I don't know. I think it's good to watch them, but it's also, good to, I don't know, grain of salt maybe is the term, but I don't know if that's true. So, um,
Definitely need to take all of it with a grain of salt
yeah,
and just be aware that, all of this is given to us in a specific package.
right.
Um, so it's whether or not we want to take the time and the energy to open the package and dive deeper, to see where things align with ourselves, or if it's just easier to, you know,
Yeah.
take the package as it's given to you and run with it. So,
That true. A
but
friend of mine,
we are,
she was
mhm,
lamenting about how when you watch people, speak their narrative, they can be so convincing. And
mhm,
I was challenging her to read more. I'm like, don't,
mhm,
because they're all performers, right? They've all been
mhm,
doing this for quite some time. And so watching them speak into something, you can get caught up in whatever narrative they're trying to push or whatever picture they're trying to paint. But
mhm,
if you're reading maybe opinions that they've given, or legislation that they've written, or
good
articles and
pass.
stuff, that's where you can really kind of get to the meat and see it through your own lens, instead of falling for whatever imagery the candidate is
It's given.
trying to give you. And it might be a more authentic version of themselves, I think. So
Hmm. That's it. That's it. We got to go find the authentic version of these people because they do have the power to impact our lives.
and it's work. It doesn't come easily, and it's not,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just grab, whatever's on the internet. You got to dig. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I find people just don't want to do. They don't want to do the digging.
But there are tons of resources out there that do the digging for you. So like there's plenty of voter
Yeah,
cards. There's
yeah,
plenty of folks in community that if you have a relationship with them that are doing the deep dives, that are doing political analysis, that are having community conversations in town halls.
right,
And so it's also a really good opportunity to get to know your community better, to participate in some of those dialogues.
yeah,
And so I would offer the suggestion to people to go and look in your community, just do some Google search online and see where these conversations are happening, because one, they're fascinating. Two, you can make some lifelong friends. Three, you can understand the knowledge and perspectives that people are coming from,
right,
and get a better idea of what to expect come
yeah,
November 5th.
yeah, yeah. It's coming.
It's coming. See you then.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks
I
for
give
joining
a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard? Why am I
continue to
so
ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck
Why do
is
I
produced
give
in
a
collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician
care so
Water.
much?
See you next time.
Why do I